This is the last of our word series lectures. So we're talking today about legibility, readability, and moods. So when we talk about legibility, legibility refers to the decoding or perception of the information being read. Elements such as shape of the letters, words, and the style all contribute to the recognition of words. I also like to refer to this mostly as accessibility because that's what it is. Context again. So the context of the text is one of the most important factors in legibility. Thinking about setting type for a license plate is much different than choosing a font for a poster. So we need things to be very clear, bold. Not that those things don't come into play when we're doing, say, a movie poster, but less bells and whistles when we're doing something in context of, say, a license plate. Or we talked early in the semester, signage on the road. So roles, distinguishing, recognition, and reading comfort also play a role. We're able to easily recognize a letter because we have learned the basic shape of letter forms over time by reviewing and writing them. Remember when we were going over when we split the words in half and we made the top half disappear versus the bottom half, which was more legible, and how quickly we recognize them just at a glance. Some letters with typefaces, with some typefaces, certain letters can be more easily distinguishable than others. So looking at a similar design for the letter G and the letter Q over here on the right-hand side. Very, very similar. At a glance, if we were to cover up this G, we would be able to see it's a Q and vice versa, but when they're sitting next to each other, they really do look almost identical. So we talk about letter form shapes, the god-awful Comic Sans. Apologize to the ones that love it in the class. I know there's a few fans. But just simply looking at the letter A and how different it can be, we probably just immediately know the difference between these two versions, the two middle versions of the letter A. But now that we're getting into various typefaces, we can see how much more they can vary. This isn't a serif, but there's still a little addition to here. Same thing. Sometimes we see the letter A and it's got a much shorter line there. So all of those things come into consideration. Then we come into the stylistic versions of the letter A, speaking about, say, like our novelty letter forms. These are all very novelty-like. How do they look? We would probably use something like this for a license plate, and then a variation of this perhaps for a movie poster. So comfort. As for reading comfort, the variance in stroke and width, letter width can affect the comfort level for the viewer. So using a typeface where the letter forms are very similar in regard, in this regard can be boring and cause fatigue. In larger blocks of copy, but maybe perfect for a word or a phrase. So talking again about legibility. Conventional letter forms. So unique decorative letter forms don't allow the reader to take in the message, or say take in the message quickly. They must process what they're looking at first. So we don't just quickly at a glance see what it is and immediately understand or be able to read that letter form or that word. We might need to think a little bit more. We're not talking, seconds compared to minutes. We're talking about a few seconds between them. But if we need people to get the information incredibly quick, then obviously that's where that's going to come into play. Then we talk about generous spacing. So if tracking is too tight, it causes your eye to fill in the visual gaps between the shapes or letter forms, which slows down the time it takes to recognize letter forms and the words. Generous spacing allows the viewer to read as fast as they're able to. So there's kind of a happy medium if it's too tracked too far. If we need someone to read something quite quickly, that can be troublesome. And the same goes if it's much too close. So taller X height. So a shorter X height decreases legibility of certain letters. Lowercase letters with counters are distinguished more easily if the X height is generous. So if we have a much taller X height, sometimes there's some maybe some interest, like a really cool typeface that we see, and say the letter D, you know, comes down here and then it goes way up. So maybe the X height could be very, very low. I've seen, and I've actually tried to use type like that personally before. Certainly does not work for body copy, really mostly works for large headlines. Although the X height shouldn't be too high, the size, weight, and width must be taken into consideration as well. Also, characters with descenders may suffer from a larger X height. So there's not going to be enough space for the ascenders and the descenders. So seeing the difference here, this one at a quick glance is much quicker to read than perhaps maybe this one. So when we talk about readability, let's talk about interpret. To read means to interpret or to understand the information being conveyed. Even if the text is legible, it may not be readable if the audience is unable to understand or interpret that exact message. The information, so readability is directly related to how the typeface is used to best ensure the information is comprehended by the audience. This is where the design and layout become integral to how easily the words, phrases, or blocks of copy can be understood with ease. So some factors which may affect this include the size, line lengths, leading, alignment, placement, background, etc. So thinking about how type is laid out in a newspaper versus a book versus a magazine, etc. Your notebooks perhaps, or any workbooks, textbooks you might have. When we think about the intended purpose, choose a font that matches the purpose. So title and body copy. So we've done a few of these before. Do you think this is fitting for UFC? Probably not. I don't think old Conor McGregor would appreciate this nice fancy script font. What about here? So not as frilly, but do we feel that this is legible? Number one. Number two, do you think this is fitting for our audience and for the application here? Probably not. We've seen this one before. Sorry, my daughter's whining. Oops. So use a suitable size for your audience. Ideally, type size ranges from 9 to 12 points, depending on the X height. So looking in relation to, say, an ad, talking about headline copy versus body copy. Justification. So choose alignment that's easy to follow. In the West, we read top to bottom and left to right. So obviously, sorry, I don't know why this little message here is up. So we want to make sure that that flow of copy, if we're targeting to this audience here, it has that eye flow, and that that flow of copy goes from left, right, top, bottom. So talking about line length. So the length of a line shouldn't be too short or too long. The optimal line length for your body text is considered to be 50 to 60 characters per line, including spaces. Other sources suggest that up to 75 characters is acceptable. Again, this just comes from some testing. It depends on your paper size. Lots of these things come into play when we are designing. So this might just be as long. I would personally, especially for readability here, I would have knocked down some of these words. So I would probably put in the kingdom down to the next line. So we get a little bit more even spacing between the top and the bottom line. Our famous leading space between the baseline should be even and consistent, always, always, always. When we're talking about leading here, so we have a little bit of odd lettering or odd leading in here. So what we have here is something called space before and space after. So the leading space before and space after, we have a little bit of extra space here. It's really tight in here. This is really difficult to read because it's inconsistent, and it's almost like it's working. These two lines are in proximity with each other, and this should be read read on its own, versus on this left side, it's all flown together. Be sure the text can be read easily on the background, always. And then we talk about our contrast and moods. Spirit. So every project has a spirit that be conveyed and amplified if thought and time goes into choosing the perfect typefaces. Personality. So do you want a modern, simple look or more classical? Is it using the logo? So all of these things are going to come into play, and your target audience or your client is going to answer these things. These are very important questions to ask at the beginning stages, whether it's for a logo or a poster, or even if it's a book. Again, who is your target? If it's, 80 years old plus, you're probably going to want to use a much larger typeface or font. If it's younger, then you can get away with smaller. With large blocks of text, choose simple typefaces that are easy to read. Average width strokes and lines are easier. So not like other fonts. So unique, engaging fonts work best when used sparingly and at larger sizes. So not large chunks of body copy. It gets really difficult to read. That's where we can bring in a different font. If we really like a cool font, maybe we just use that for our headline, or maybe our one word, a couple words for that headline, and then we use something much more simplistic for our body copy. So images are always considered. So consider the impact of type on images. If the image is driving the design, keep type simple so the image in fact stands out. We also need to consider contrast. This is fairly simple. We can place text above or below. If this is a very busy image, or sometimes there's like a medium tone color, and you can't quite figure out if we want to use black type on that background or if we need white type on that background, because it's a really mid-range color. So perhaps that might not work, or you might need to block it out in some form of design. So the mood of the design can appear formal or informal, light or dramatic, modern, traditional, warm or cool. Fonts are not limited to a single mood, or combinations can create different moods, mood associations. I'll always consider the theme. Establishing mood can be complex. Each person's experiences can affect the mood they perceive. For example, script and cursive type choices instantly create more of a whimsical and a feminine look. I would argue feminine's probably not the right terminology here, but definitely more of a whimsical look, a formal look, I would say. Again, it's not to be bucketed into one blanket statement, because there's also lots of really fun, happy looking fonts, and that might not be the formal look. So talking about trends, high impact trendy fonts are not always readable. It can create either a sense of intrigue or it could be chaos. As with all trends, be mindful of how they age. So is this going to be a poster for a concert for one night? Go crazy. Do everything modern you want to do. Perhaps this is a company that has already been around for many years. They're not going anywhere 4 years later, and we need to redevelop a brand. We don't want to go with something super modern, because that just means they're going to need to redo this in a few years. So keeping a little bit more neutral, essentially, we can still make it look modern, but nothing too wild. Will give it longevity, to be able to continuously use that and it not look dated in 5 years, potentially. Adding colors, so mood can be affected by color choices. So the use of color should be considered. Always think about how color can strike a chord with you.